Today we're here to talk about the 50th anniversary of Title IX. But what do the next 50 years look like, and how can we do better? I've been trying to answer this question for athletes with disabilities ever since I did a private lesson with one of my swimmers I coach as part of the nonprofit Adapt to Sports New England. We got together to work on things like techniques specific to her disability, but also how to get in and out of the pool one-handed without falling in, because it certainly happens to the best of us. Afterwards, we went out to dinner and got to talking about the ins and outs of disability, about the broader disabled community, and then she asked me, does it get better? What she was referring to is the ableism, the segregation, the staring. Does it get better? And I couldn't say yes. Even though there was almost 15 years between the two of us, I couldn't tell her that it got better from when I was her age to now. And that broke me. But it also lit a fire. To explain this a little bit more, let me tell you a bit about my story. I'm a 2012 Paralympic bronze medalist in the sport of swimming. And honestly, I'm one of the lucky ones. Now, you might ask how a person born with a disability, given up at birth because of that disability, with a life-threatening disease in a city halfway around the country, or around the world, in Kyrgyzstan, might consider themselves lucky. But when you look at the facts of how I got here today, it makes a little bit more sense. Over 15% of the world's population is born with a disability, yet only a fraction of us compete in sports, and less than 0.01% of all of the population, disabled or not, medal at the Games. Now, I worked hard to get to where I am today, but I also acknowledge part of my success is due to me slipping through a system that was not designed for me and was even designed to keep people like me out. After being adopted and brought to Virginia, I was never really told no growing up. As an only child, that might have led to a few personality disorders, but as a person with a disability, that was exactly what I needed. When I wanted to swim, my mom and dad encouraged me instead of listening to other parents who said I should play soccer, because all I had to do was use my legs. And here's where some of that luck comes into play. As I started to get better and better, I had coaches that believed in me. But I was also able to keep up with my teammates, for the most part, and didn't require any adaptations. In the Paralympics, actually, you're not allowed to use any assistive devices anyway. But some athletes with disabilities aren't able to do the same, and are forced to stop altogether. And this difference in involvement isn't just due to disability, but because of not having things like peers to compete with, so coaches don't know what to do with them, and instead of doing the work to include, excuses are made, and athletes fall through the cracks because there's no safety net to prevent it. Some get lucky with coaches willing to adjust practices or bend the rules for participation, but certainly not enough. As my classmates and teammates headed down the traditional path to college, I again got lucky because the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee had a swim training program specific to athletes with disabilities. And I was able to go out to Colorado Springs and train full-time and ultimately make it to the 2012 Paralympic Games. As I trained for the Rio 2016 Games before a career-ending surgery right before trials, I again got lucky and was able to swim on a D1 collegiate team as a volunteer swim coach, and a gold medal rated team here in the Boston area with Olympic swim coach Chuck Batchelor, who always made sure there was room for me. And these opportunities were due to workarounds of systems, because if the coaches did not purposefully accommodate me, I wouldn't have been able to train at the level I needed. I succeeded not because of institutions working in my favor, but because I was able to hang on to the edge, just scraping by with hard work, determination, and of course, a little bit of luck. But here's a story where luck did not come into play. In 2008, 2 weeks after returning from the Beijing Paralympic Games, my teammate and fiance was cut from his D1 team because the ratio in men at the college was too high. And this was a direct result of the college following Title IX protocol. So instead of having regulations in place to create a space for all athletes to thrive, he was removed to make room for another able-bodied athlete. And while it was important that those female athletes had opportunities, it was at the expense of another marginalized person. And herein lies the area for growth when it comes to things like Title IX, that focus on compliance instead of things like equity or justice. While it's a crucial precedent, so many disabled athletes still get left behind or even discounted and removed. His and my athlete stories are not rare. So many times, athletes with disabilities are stopped from or just simply feel alone when competing. And the burden of creating change is on our shoulders just because we want to show up and participate. For example, in swimming, for a breaststroke and butterfly, you are required to touch the wall with both hands during a turn and a finish. When I was swimming on the high school team at my school, I was disqualified at a meet for doing a one-handed touch. Yes. My coach obviously brought me over to the official, told me to hold out my arms, and the official realized what had happened and quickly overturned it. I tell you this because, first, it happened more than once, but also because my uncle was an official in the Northern Virginia area a while after I moved out to Colorado, and he told me that they still talked about this instance as an example when training new officials on things that might happen, may or may not happen. While I'm glad I was able to make a positive impact, it should not have taken disqualifying a one-handed person for them to realize they needed to train their officials on disability. And these gaps in access and education are not mistakes. They are due to centuries of ableism. It's a whole other TED Talk. And current structures that are made so only a few make it through. But the good news is we all have the power to create change and do better. This is where that equity and allyship especially come into play. As we continue to fight for inclusion, we must also ask ourselves, is anyone being excluded because of our decisions? Is there a different way of approaching the same goal that isn't at the sacrifice of someone else's opportunity? We have to get away from that pie analogy, where if someone gets more, someone else gets less. Equity is not a pie. It's an endless open field just waiting for people to make it through. This focus on principles like equity, justice, and access, instead of just diversity and inclusion, is the only way forward. And this thinking doesn't just establish inclusion for people with disabilities, it makes sure that athletes of color, the LGBTQIA+ community, low-income families, and others are given equitable opportunities as well. This frame of thinking also doesn't just apply to the world of sports. It must transcend all industries, whether it's fashion, public transit, or technology. So by being holistically proactive in our thinking and creating of policies like Title IX, athletes with disabilities won't have to rely on luck and the bending of rules, but will be welcomed at the start of their journey. And if we're all able to think like this, I will be able to tell athletes 50 years from now that it has gotten better. Thank you.